Well, thanks for joining us today in the Storycraft Cafe. I am your host, Hank Garner, and today I'm super excited to have Sophie Jordan on the show with me. She's got a brand new book that, if you're listening to this live, it actually comes out tomorrow. But if you're listening to this on the podcast channel, then it will already be out. It drops Tuesday, March 28th, and you can grab it anywhere that you buy books. The book is called The Scandalous Ladies of London. And the first book in this new series is The Countess. And what a fun book. Welcome to the show, Sophie.
Hi, thank you. Happy to be
Thanks
here.
for thanks for joining us today. Sophie, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Um, my first memory, I think was probably junior high, and I was just reading a lot at that time. That's when I think I really dove into reading and dove into books. Uh, and I lived kind of out in the middle of nowhere, west of San Antonio. So all I really had were books and just two stations. I mean, God, that feels like that ages me so much right now. Not anything to watch on TV, no internet. So books were my friends. And then,
Yeah.
you read these books that sweep you away and you fall in love with, and you want to keep that feeling alive. And sometimes the next book doesn't provide it because you're looking for a certain
Right.
thing. So then you start writing it yourself. So I guess I was like 13 or 14. And I don't know if I thought, hey, I'm going to be published someday. I was just doing it for myself then. And I think that's
Right.
how most writers start, by when they write, when they first start writing, they're doing it for themselves. And then they love it so much, maybe start sharing it with friends. And then they want to do it, for an
Yeah.
audience.
In my mind, writing because you're a writer and writing for commerce are sometimes totally different things.
Right.
Yeah.
It
It's
just
just
becomes like you start doing it for yourself. And then a realization happens where you're like, wait, maybe I could get paid for this too. Like, to get paid to do something you love is
right.
just an amazing opportunity.
Yeah. The Countess is book number what for you?
It is, well, I was like, it's book one in a new series. Someone asked me this the other day, and I get asked this question every time I have a book come out, and I should know the answer. I know I'm over 50 books at this point.
Wow.
Um, so probably 55 or so, 56. I'd have to count. I mean, I've written across genres,
Yeah.
so I'd have to count among historicals. I have young adult novels. I have contemporary. Again, I'm still that early reader who finds the thing that she loves. You find the
Yeah.
thing you're reading that you love so much, or even TV shows or movies, right? That inspire you, and suddenly you're writing something that is triggered by that.
I'm so glad you said that, and this question just popped into my head. Um, a lot of times, um, writers will have I mean, we as people have varied interest. Very
Mhm.
few people that I know of live a life that is geared toward one genre, if that makes sense.
Right.
And like, I read very widely, and I love thrillers, and I love
Me too.
mystery, and I love science fiction and fantasy, and I love some romance, and but when I write thriller mysteries is
Mhm.
kind of my wheelhouse. But I love all these other things. How do you find the thing that you love that you can also write?
Because like you, my tastes are
Mhm.
so varied. It's
Yeah.
it's tricky. I have a little bit of that complex. You remember in is it Pixar or Disney did the movie Up, where the dog
Mhm.
is like squirrel, squirrel.
Yes.
I feel like
Yeah.
I'm constantly saying squirrel, and I'm in the middle of one book and I get an idea, and it may be in the same genre or it may not, but
Right.
story ideas can come anywhere. Um, I too read. I mean, I read outside the romance genre. I read historical fiction. I read thrillers. It's uh, tricky sometimes. Deadlines and contracts keep me on task,
Yes.
but otherwise, I would be writing all over the place all the time. But I do. I follow a passion. I don't chase trends. I think that is a a mistake for a writer because I chase what I love and what story I want to write in that moment. That's what I follow.
So, there are some people that would say do market research, find out where a big audience is, and then
Mhm.
write for that audience, and that's valid. Um, if that
Right.
interests you, but then there's this other idea of, like you just said, write what you love, and
Hmm.
then find your tribe of other people that
Right.
love what you write and invite them in. Is that kind of the way you
I
see
think
it?
so. I think it helps any writer to know the market, to know what's
Mhm.
popular. Maybe you're not writing the most popular thing, but certainly know the market, know your audience and who you're writing for. I do try to do that. I do know if what I'm loving is not very marketable. I don't know. I don't know if I always listen to that voice because what's marketable this year may be totally different next year. And then
Exactly.
from the moment I start a story, it's 12 to 18 months before it ever hits a shelf. So chasing a trend and chasing the market is kind of like it's a slippery little, eel in your hands,
Well, you
right?
always wind up chasing yesterday's trends because
Exactly.
by the time you get to market,
Right.
it may still be hot,
It may be, and I
it might
definitely feel
not.
like I've come in early sometimes to a trend, sometimes I've come late, sometimes I've hit right when it's going on, and that's great. So you can't predict a lot of these things, so you might as well write what you're loving. Because if you're loving
Exactly.
it, it's gonna be a better story. If it's resonating with you as a writer, then it's more than likely gonna resonate with readers.
So what was that first book, that took you from, uh, writing as a hobby or thinking that storytelling was something that you loved and made a professional out of you? What was the first book that you had published?
My first book that I published was a historical romance novel, which wasn't even the first book I ever wrote. I wrote a paranormal romance first, which I actually was more like in the days urban fantasy. I
Mhm.
did sell that book, the first book, but later. So you never throw anything away. Never
Yeah.
think it's hey, it may not be the right time, but like we've been talking about, maybe in a couple years will be the time for that manuscript. But I read a lot of I discovered John Jakes when I was like 13. I liked the historical saga. John Jakes wrote the North and South
Right.
trilogy and they made so many movies out of his books. I liked the idea of a family and characters. I mean, multiple families. I mean, saga is the word here that
Yeah.
spans maybe a few decades even, and then you have their children, so I liked those really big meaty books that would maybe stretch 10 or 12 books in a series. I read everything from that to Stephen King to Sweet Valley High books when I was 13. I think all of it. Made me the writer I am today. I like a romance and a story, but then now I like thrillers, and sometimes they have a romance, sometimes they don't. So I think it's just always looking for, I mean, I think suspense is a word that often gets associated only with thrillers and suspense
Mhm.
novels. But suspense to me is the thing that just keeps you turning the page.
Right.
And so I think just having stories that are laden with suspense, no matter the genre.
Yeah. When you start thinking about sagas, um, a lot of people, when you start thinking through a story, you're looking for a character that means something to you, and then maybe a plot device, something you can do to this
Mhm.
character, and then see how they resolve this conflict. But
Right.
a saga is a very different thing. Your tapestry is very wide,
Mhm.
and you're talking about, like you said, multi-generational
Mhm.
stories. Um, how do you think in terms of plot, the thing driving this story and driving this character, when you start thinking in terms of a big generational story?
Oh, those are scary. I don't know that I've actually written a story where they've grown up and I've carried it through to their children. Now, I might have in
Yeah,
historical romance. I know I will have readers that will I could ask in on Facebook and they tell me right away. I certainly have uh, family and friend groups. I've
yeah,
had younger sisters, younger brothers, sibling dynamics. it is tricky to keep track of those kinds of things. Like you almost need to create your story Bible to go with it. So my book that comes out tomorrow, The Scandalous Ladies of London, obviously it's a group, it's a cast of characters. It's these,
Yeah.
obviously it's a predominantly a female group. Some of them are related, some of them are friends. They're all knitted together into one group. There's even some that aren't friends necessarily in the group, and I feel that that's very authentic. I think we've all had that friend where you're really good friends with someone, so you keep getting thrown together with their friend who you may not necessarily be good friends with, but you have that one common friend. So that sort of even happens in the group. So this group of women are family members, they're friends, they're not friends, and there's almost between them 20, some of them a 20, 30-year age difference. And I think that's interesting. I don't want, I'm of a certain age. I have a 20-year-old. I recently was out to dinner with a friend who was in her, she's pregnant. And I feel like that puts us at such a different place in life, but that can
Yeah.
actually happen, where here I am, I have a child in college, and here's this friend of mine who's just starting out. So I just think that creates interesting relationships. And it lends itself to different plots and stories that can be told.
Yeah. With a back catalog of 55 books or so, um, do, do you prefer to write in series, or is there something about a standalone that intrigues you? What do you think are the benefits and maybe drawbacks of writing a series versus standalone?
Oh, there's pros and cons to both, right?
Of course.
I mean, when you write a series, you like you're almost seeding future books within the series, right?
Right.
So in the Scandalous Ladies of London, I have in the Countess, there's points of view of the main characters, and then also I've included points of view of of characters that are going to have their own stories. So I definitely think it's a lot of readers love that. They love meeting a
Yeah.
character in one book and then they get their story in the next book. Uh, it's almost the thing I get asked right away. So when you build a series, they're like, "When's so and so's story? When's so and so's book?" So I love that. Um, I love it from the standpoint as an author. It's also a little bit, I think, of care and feeding of your readers. They like to, go on this journey that spans multiple books. But there's also something really liberating when you write a standalone. I haven't done that many, but I have ideas for standalones, and I think it's funny because even when you write a standalone, if you have an intriguing secondary character in a standalone, you will be asked if that character is getting a book. That is
Yeah.
just what the readers are going to do.
Well, when you I'm fascinated by the moment of creation. At one moment in time, nothing about the scandalous ladies of London exist. It just
Yeah.
doesn't exist. And then either a character walks onto the stage of your mind and you start wondering who is this and what is she
Mhm.
about? And you start kind of playing the what if game, or whatever that spark is that kind
Mhm.
of kicks off the whole thing. And then the series does exist in some form or fashion. That's your job as the writer to kind of dig the story out and excavate it and
Mhm.
polish it up and all of that. What is that moment of inspiration like for you when a new story comes to life?
I love the way you just explain it because it's like this suddenly there's a person there that never
Yeah,
existed before. And you breathe life into them, or sometimes they pop in your head fully formed,
right.
but you bit by bit they unveil themselves to you. Um it definitely it feels like a powerful thing. And storytellers, we are, the god of our universe.
Yeah,
And it's a great sense of euphoria almost, right? When you
hmm,
first, I love plotting a book, right? I love that moment when that character appears. Then I start, then their family and their friends and their whole world starts filling in. It's this blank canvas that bit by bit is coming to life with color and characters, and a landscape. Um, I always tell people I think the most exciting part is that stage, that plotting and planning stage, when everything is bright and colorful and the world is perfect in all its flaws
Oh
and the
yeah.
conflict that the character has. Like, I haven't even put the first word on the page yet, but it's full of so many possibilities. That is definitely the most exciting part of the writing process for me. Second, and probably even more exciting than writing the end when you finished it.
I love it. So, what was the big idea that started this series?
Okay, I did. I do. I've often been. It's been commented, right, in that my historical romances, especially, they feel so soapy and high drama. And of course, in my mind, I'm like thinking, yes, they should. That's
Yeah.
the world is full of conflict.
Right.
And I am guilty of watching reality television. So I kind of one day was watching one of the many, Real Housewives, and I was like, these are just like Regency dames, in
Yeah.
London, like in the Ton. I could see it so clearly. Um, and just sort of, that was the niggle. Like that was the first nugget of the idea. And then, female friendships, relationships are important to me. And I thought, well, what better place than Regency London? Especially it's a time where convention wasn't really on side of
Yeah.
the women couldn't vote yet. If you were married, it was either your father or your husband in charge. So seeing how a group of women would come to rely on their friendship and each other in that time, uh, it just was a recipe for drama. And the idea of the the friendship, but also the backstabbing and the maybe infighting, and I imagine table flipping and wig flying, and like it lend itself to all the
Yeah.
shenanigans of a great story.
Is historical fiction kind of your default world when you first start thinking of stories? Do they kind of tend to be this sort of genre, or do you have to kind of rewind in your mind and set a story there? Like, do stories
I
just naturally live there for you?
I think for the most part, yes. I've written contemporary in the past, and I certainly see myself returning to contemporary at some point, but alongside of historicals. I don't ever see the historical fiction author in me, my interest in history disappearing. I also just think is such a ripe area for stories. Um, you know, you can look at the world today and and watch the news, and as problematic as so much of it is, as concerning as it is, and we watch the headlines and we're like, oh, it's so tragic. Everywhere you look, there's something tragic happening.
Yeah.
Um, we still have so many more freedoms than we used to.
Right.
So yeah, writing in an era where you know females and women were put in situations where they had to fight for control and power and autonomy in their own lives. That's just the foundation of a great story can be found there. The conflict is there. And I think there's nothing more hopeful than seeing them reach it, their happily ever after, find their happiness, find their autonomy in life. And I never like to say it's not because they fell in love. It's just like, and they fell in love, they found this great romance, but also they found themselves in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, I'll never ever fall short of finding a story set in, whatever era. I've never written a medieval, but I love medieval romances.
Yeah.
I think that too is an era where like, oh, how could you find romance in such a, bleak landscape?
Yeah.
It was called the Dark Ages for a reason,
Right.
But wow,
Exactly.
if you can find love where, so many women and classes of people are suppressed and love can exist, there's nothing more hopeful than that.
And that might even be some of the most powerful love stories that you could tell would be,
Right.
when kind of the love at
Mhm.
all, with all the odds
Right.
against you sort of.
Love overcomes. And I
Exactly.
think modern readers can read a historical if you're, and people might ask, well, why is this relevant? How can we today read this? Well, you can read these stories and find relevancy just for that very reason that, love can
Sure.
conquer and overcome great obstacles.
Right. Um, every genre has, and some genres more so have sticklers that are, you know, I don't want to say they act like gatekeepers, but they can, they're the people that you know write in Amazon reviews. This would never happen in this setting,
Mhm.
and so everybody kind of deals with some of that when you're trying to accurately portray the world that you're creating. Um,
Mhm.
the types of books that you write are they? Um, is that something that you have to deal with? Do you ever have critics that are like, "Well, this wouldn't have happened in this time period," and if so, how do you deal with that?
Okay.
How do you
I mean, I
put those
think
safeguards?
right, people that would question the plausibility.
Yeah,
Okay. I think my predominant reader reads historical romance, so they know what they're getting when they come into it. They're willing to suspend, you know, a small amount of disbelief, perhaps. I mean, hey, it's 1820,
yeah,
and his teeth are straighter than my son's with braces, right? Like, what are the odds? Their teeth is really white and straight, and everybody has a full mouth of straight, beautiful white teeth, and when they're 50 years old. I mean, that
right,
doesn't even happen today, right? So, no, and
right,
stories, medieval romances. No one talks, right? They smell great. So, I mean, these are certain things we
right.
want to deliver the fantasy, but and I think our readers, they don't. I think there's a way to deliver the truth of the time and the era and still tell a romance and tell a fantastical story. And I think historical romance readers know what to expect when they come into it, so they're going to accept the fact that this guy is a tanned Englishman and he has straight teeth in 1830
Right, right.
and no body odor. They're like, yes, I'm on board for this. That's what I want to read about.
Gotcha. The Scandalous Ladies of London, because this is a new series. When you first start planning out the series, how far along do you plan? Do you plan that, okay, this might be a trilogy, and if it's a
Right.
trilogy, then these are going to be the small arcs that
Right.
lead to the big arc. Are you thinking further out than that? And kind of
Well,
how do you handle the beginnings of a new series?
so I'm contracted. I know I'm contracted for 3 in the
Okay.
Scandalous Ladies of London. And for those who read The Countess, which is out tomorrow, or if you're reading it, it just
Yeah.
released. It's book 1. Book 2 is The Duchess, and I actually provided the first chapter in the back of that book.
Okay.
So I have, when I'm writing the Countess, I already knew it was going to be the Duchess, and she is in the story. There's even a couple scenes with her POV, which will be funny and helpful, but also maybe constraining because I better stay. I'm bound by those scenes I already wrote about in her point of view. So you
Right.
do have to do some planning, and you do have to think ahead a little bit. Book 3 can be one of 2 characters, and I'm not even that sure which one yet, because like I said, the Scandalous Ladies of London is an entire group. So I do know to plan a little bit. But I will say, as I'm sitting down, I'm working on the book 2 right now. I've come up with a few ideas I didn't have when I wrote the first book, but fortunately they're going to fit. I'm not doing anything that contradicts something I already wrote. So that's always the challenge, right? Yes, I plan ahead, but there's always room for growth and, oh, I'm going to make these twists and these changes. Um, I know book 1 obviously is who it's about. Book 2 is about the Duchess. Book 3, it's one of 2 characters. And I have written series that spanned I have one series that spanned 7 books, I think. Oh, by the end, it gets tricky and it gets complicated. And sometimes I would have shout outs to readers on Facebook, like, do y'all remember which book I said, blah, blah, blah. So it is useful from an author
Yeah.
standpoint to create that story Bible to go along when you're writing a series. Because, yes, you can forget things. You can even forget certain names of maybe a secondary character that was around in book 1 a lot, but not so much in book 2. And then you need them again in book 3. And you're like, what was that name? And so,
Right.
yes, it takes a little planning. There's a responsibility involved when you're writing a series.
Um, every genre has its hallmarks of the genre, things that if you're a reader of this genre, you come to expect that certain things are going to be there. And we take comfort in those genre expectations, but then we also expect the writer to take these constraints and do something new in each time. So
Right.
if I'm thinking about a high fantasy, I'm going to expect there to be a wizard and probably a
Mhm.
king and, you know, a certain landscape. If it's a political thriller, I'm going to expect that maybe it takes place in Washington, D.C. There are
Mhm.
some congressmen involved, and, there's some shady shenanigans going on in a back
Right.
room. In a historical romance, I expect maybe Regency
Mhm.
dress and certain social conventions and that sort of thing. One thing that I love about the Scandalous Ladies of London is you are taking a lot of those preconceived notions and flipping them on their head.
Right.
And so we have very familiar, the story feels familiar, and it's
Right.
very easy to slip into this mindset and to go into the story. And then you are just constantly pulling the rug out from under us because the things that we kind of expect to happen are different.
I'm
What was your
glad, thank
idea?
you.
Yeah.
I tried to do that, partly maybe eh, I've written so many historical romances, I have to do that for myself as well as for the reader. I
Yeah.
mean, there are certain archetypes. You have the debutante, you have a dowager, and I guess, in this situation, you have the mother, the matron who wants her daughter to be married, and she looks like a Mrs. Bennet from Pride and Prejudice, perhaps.
Right.
But in this case, my countess is pretty much the the matron who's taking her daughter through the season trying to get her married. That is the protagonist. That is the heroine. So I do try to change it up as much for me after writing so many historical romances as for the reader, just to offer them something different. So yes, you will find the familiar, but the heroine in this case is an older woman. She's married. She has, you know, a dastardly, wretched husband who, it was an arranged marriage, nothing she herself chose. They didn't have the luxury of love matches. So, yeah, taking all the things that are familiar about historical romances and then reinventing them or twisting them, making something different happen. I love it. I live for that. I live for it as a writer and also reading them.
So, since this is going to be a series,
Mhm.
um, are you going to be thinking throughout the series of ways to subvert the genre standards like you did in book 1?
Yeah, I'm gonna try. So, I mean, what everyone's talking about in the Countess is that yes, the heroine is married, which usually that is a major no-no. Nobody wants to read a
Right.
romance about a married woman, or at least a lot of readers don't. But she's such an empathetic character, like I mentioned, that she didn't choose this marriage for herself, and it's a bad marriage, and her husband's a bad man, and they quickly root for her to fall in love and find love, and in book 2 I'm going to try it again, and I do have I feel like I don't want to see, I'm pausing because of spoilers. So but yeah, book 2 is again not like you think, oh, it's the Duchess, there's going to be going against some archetypes also.
Nice. Well, the Countess Book 1 of the Scandalous Ladies of London is out everywhere tomorrow. If you're watching this live or if you're listening to this on the podcast channel, it's already available everywhere and you can run out and grab it. We're going to put links in the show notes if you want to grab it in Kindle edition or paperback or Audible. Have you listened to any of the audiobook yet?
I am an audio junkie.
Me too.
Do you like audio?
Oh, yeah.
I love audiobooks. And I love Justine Eyre is the narrator. I was offered some options, and I did. She's a popular narrator favorite among
Yeah.
historical romance readers. So she does an excellent job. Um, I like my speed set on 1.2. Like,
I
what do
do too.
I
I
think
do.
if it's too slow, I don't know. I'm like, come on, hurry.
Yeah.
Your authors are writing, we want
Yeah.
you, we're building suspense, we want you to flip the pages, so I want
Yeah.
the narrator. I recommend reading at 1.2,
I
and
do
she does a
too.
great job.
There are a couple of narrators that I'll bump it up to 1.4 or 5 if they
I've done
just
that too.
do a lot of pauses and but
Exactly.
yeah, I
I
yeah,
think
that's
you're right. Depending on who. the narrator is, I think you should definitely always play around with the speed
Yeah,
and see what you like. Yes, I
exactly.
love, I don't know yet who will be narrating the second book, but Justine did a great job on book one.
Excellent. Um, the Scandalous Ladies of London, The Countess, either available tomorrow or already available.
Mhm.
Go grab it today. Use the links in the show notes if you prefer to shop with Amazon. If not, go to your local bookstore, grab it off the shelf. Sophie, if people are just discovering you and want to dig into all the great stuff that you're up to, my goodness, you've got a 55
I
book
do.
back catalog. Where can they find all of that
I do.
and dig into?
If you I have a website, sophiejordan.net. It's a .net,
Okay,
but I actually have a PDF downloadable book list, so you could see I have my historicals listed there. Everything's listed in order of
excellent.
publication also.
Is that at
Historical
your website?
romances on my
Okay.
website, sophiejordan.net. His young adult novels I've written, my contemporary, my um, all of it. You can see everything.
Great, great. We'll put that in the show notes as well to make it easier for folks to find you. Sophie, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today. It's been a
Thank
lot of
you.
fun.
It was fun. I appreciate it.